Good morning, friends. Welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this video, I'll be discussing with you economics current affairs for 6th November 2024. I've selected 3 articles from the Mint newspaper. 2 articles speak about environmental finance, directly or indirectly. Very important articles, very good articles. So, first article is a very newsy article. It gives us a sense of what's happening so far as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change related Conference of Parties is concerned. And the second article is an editorial article. It speaks about the kind of steps that India should take for making sure that we are able to achieve our environmental plans, right? So I intend to spend around 15-20 minutes discussing these 2 articles. And the third article is a very good article, right? It speaks about the kind of investments that Indian corporate sector is planning for the future ahead, right? So whether it is a Schumpeterian kind of an investment or whether it is a Keynesian kind of an investment. So in that sense, it's a very beautiful article that I would like to discuss with you. So let us start with our discussion. I hope that I am clearly audible to all of you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Kavita. Right? Yep. So just expect that I will start the class at around 7:35 a.m. in the morning. Usually I'm able to do that 7:35, 7:36. Sometimes I'm at 7:37. So sorry about that. Let us start. Right? So I'm discussing this particular article because this will serve as an important input into your answer writing. Right? This will serve as an important current affairs update into your answer writing. That a UN report has called for literally trillions of dollars in climate finance, right? So let me put some numbers, let me highlight some numbers that are going to be really relevant for you. So developing nations need around $1.1 trillion annually, right, by 2025, right? And this number will increase to 1.8 trillion by 2030. So this is the number that we need annually, right, as developing nations, right? Now this is not some casual back of the envelope calculation that we're talking about over here, right? So this is as per a new report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that is UNCTAD, right? So this is obviously not easy at all. It's a daunting roadmap in the sense that we are not getting this money, right? Earlier too, there was commitment or there was this estimate that was put into place. This is about last decade, that annually developing nations would require $1 trillion of climate finance, right? And given the fact that developed nations have polluted their way towards prosperity, I will repeat myself only once and exactly once, that developed nations have polluted their way towards prosperity. They have the money, they have released the greenhouse gases, they have brought about or accelerated climate change. So therefore they should provide the finance that is required. They should provide the finance that is required by developing countries, because developing countries don't have that kind of money sitting around. They can't print that money. Nobody will give that money as a loan to them. So they should be helped. Developing countries should be helped. So the idea was that $1 trillion needs to be provided annually by developed countries to developing countries as climate finance. It has never happened. It has never happened. So do you think that $1.1 trillion annually will be provided to developing countries? It will never happen based on the previous track record, right? So obviously, escalating financial commitment is required to support the global climate goals, right? Now there is something called as, this is a new term, relatively new term, new collective quantified goal, right? We have talked about INDCs, that is intended nationally determined contributions. This is a new term that I want to add to your vocabulary, new collective quantified goal, right? So the idea is that this new collective quantified goal, right? So the contribution target is starting at 0.89 trillion. It will increase to 1.46 trillion within 5 years, right? So that's around 1.4% of developed nations GDP. It is about 2% of developing countries GDP. That is the number that we are looking at in terms of contribution towards climate finance, right? Now there is something called as a United Nations Global Policy Model. So using this UNGPM, we have come up to these targets of 1.4% of GDP and 2% of GDP, right? And obviously you can understand that these are urgent targets, because elsewhere we have discussed that by the end of the century, we will not be able to contain the rise in temperature to 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial average. Rather, we will be somewhere close to 2.5, 2.7 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial average, right? So the urgency is well understood, right? So we need high quality, effective climate finance, right? That is what we need. All right. Now, what is going to happen is that there is this conference of parties, as I mentioned at the start of the lecture, that as a part of UNFCCC, there is a conference of parties that happen every year. So that conference of parties is going to happen in Baku in Azerbaijan, right? And there is going to be negotiation on this NCQG. And again, to just reiterate, NCQG is standing for your new collective quantified goal, right? So there is going to be negotiation around this NCQG, right? So the idea being that we need to go beyond this $100 billion per year ka floor, right? And we need these new numbers to be agreed upon, right? Obviously, it's not that easy, right? We need climate finance which is transparent, which is adaptable, which is easily accessible. These are not just words, these are very important. Adaptable in the sense that we should not get tied funds. We need untied funds because each country has its own requirements. It has its own challenges, right? We need it easily accessible in the sense that we shouldn't have to, produce tons and tons of report, do tons and tons of verification, get tons and tons of monitoring done, and then get some chiller, right? We don't want that kind of money because that's not going to help. It's not going to get the job done, right? So that's what the idea over here is, that we need an equitable approach, right? In the sense that yes, it's a common responsibility to fight against climate change, but it's a differentiated responsibility in the sense that developing countries haven't polluted as much as developed countries have. So the responsibility to fight against climate change lies more in the quarters of developed countries, right? And the developed countries are the ones who have greater capabilities. So there are some developing countries such as China and India which have growing capabilities. So we need to fight as per our respective capabilities as well, right? So small countries such as maybe Finland may not be having so much capability as, let's say, China may be having, right? So we understand it's a common responsibility, but it is a differentiated responsibility, and it is a respective capability wala approach that we need to take, right? So that effort sharing is done fairly, right, amongst all the countries, right? So we need an IFA. What is IFA? Now this is another acronym that I'm adding to your vocabulary. We need an international financial architecture. We need an IFA, right? So these words have to be a part of your regular vocabulary now, whether it is your general studies answers or whether it is your essay writing or whatever it is. This needs to be a part of your general vocabulary now, right? So we need a strong international financial structure, and that is very, very important. That's obvious, right? So that's what the requirement of the day is, right? Apart from that, right, there is some idea which is being provided by one Mr. Manoj Bhardwaj. So he is batting for a regional finance infrastructure, right? So a solution grounded in regional finance infrastructure, right? Collaborative economic frameworks based on European Union's recent experience, right? So what he's saying is that group countries with similar needs and regional characteristics under multilateral bodies, and then provide tailored responsive climate finance solutions in the global south, which is eminent, which makes sense, right? This makes sense. For example, there are a lot of small island developing states, right? Very small countries, island countries, right? So naturally they should be grouped under one basket. There are certain countries in South Asia, right, which can be booked under some basket, same basket. So that makes sense, right? Like for example, organizations such as SARC. Now SARC in itself is a dysfunctional organization, thanks to the kind of imbroglio which exists, let's say, between Pakistan and India. So SARC could lead efforts, geopolitical challenges, etc. This is more of a pipe dream. Let's forget about this, right? So this NCQG, right, new collective quantified goals, right? So this was established by UNFCCC. It aims to channel at least $100 billion per year in climate finance by 2025, and this funding is essential. So I hope that this part is very clear to all of you. This is more like a current affairs ka update, right, which has been provided to you, and I am assuring you that as conference of parties related article come, as environment related articles come, I'll select the best articles for discussion and I'll bring it forward for you. Okay. Now let us quickly go through the second article, which is again speaking about environmental plans. Right. Now let's just talk about this. Right. So see, this is starting slightly pessimistically, that changing the behavior of the population is a nigh impossible task, meaning it is nearly impossible to change the behavior of the population, right? So apparently we are speaking about the type and quantity of crackers that were burst during Diwali celebrations, right? So this is starting from that point of view, that yes, people have not changed their behavior and political leaders have not really stepped up to the requirement of the time, right? So yes, this is a problem, right? Some particular number over here which I want to just highlight, right? That 8.7 million people have died prematurely from smoking in 2019. 7.5 million were direct smokers and the rest were passive smokers, right? So you can understand, right, that yes, this is a problem. If you look at India's smoking population, therefore this is a loss, right? This is a demographic loss, by the way. In economic terms, these are the number of people who could have contributed productively but have perished too early after, let us say, it is not a very nice thing for me to say, but the idea is that if, let's say, I pass away now, right? So the entire effort and money that has been spent on my education, my healthcare, raising me up, bringing me up to this point where I can start contributing towards the society, all of that is absolutely wasted, right? What I could have done for the next 30, 35, 40 years, I wouldn't be doing. So it's just a waste, right? So it's not the nicest thing to say that somebody passing away is just a waste, but yeah, it's just a waste of resources for the society concerned, right? Now, of course, our smoking population has fallen from 50%, right? So 27% of the population still smokes in 2020, which is quite a high number, right? Country's death rate from smoking fell from 121 per lakh to 76 in 2021. This needs to fall further. Again, the idea over here is that passive smoking is also a problem, pollution is also a problem. That is what the author will try to say, right? So the idea over here is that we have to have a sense of hope, right? Because we have been able to manage we have been able to bend the curve because of the persistent messaging through variety of channels that smoking is injurious to health, it causes cancer, it is injurious to health, it causes cancer. Now it is something which is imprinted in everybody's psyche and understanding, right? So the idea over here is that yes, this has been helpful, right? Now apparently there is this new report, right? 10 new insights in climate science report of 24-25, right? So air particulate matter reduction, it has significant public health benefits, PM 10 and PM 2.5, which a lot of you candidates must be familiar with terminology, right? So PM 10 and PM 2.5 are very small particulate matter. If they get lodged into your lungs, etc., they reduce your breathing capacities and causes you a variety of respiratory challenges, right? So that's a problem, right? Apart from that, so what's important over here? What do I discuss with you, right? So so the so yeah, 2015 everybody committed to NDCs, that is nationally determined commitments, right? Governments created these ideas and goals, right? But there is clear consensus now that we will not be achieving our target of 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature rise above the industrial average. So we are going to be exceeding that, right? Even if we take all the net zero commitments, what are net zero commitments? Like for example, India has given this commitment that by 2070, Indian economy will be a net zero emission economy, in the sense that whatever we emit, right, we will reabsorb it back through various different technology means, etc., or by having a decent amount of forest cover, right? So that is what I mean by net zero. Net zero doesn't mean that emission will be zero. Net zero means that whatever we emit, we will be able to capture it back, right? So the idea is that there is this emissions gap report of United Nations Environment Program, right? So that reveals that we have a high likelihood, above 90%, that the temperature rise will increase by greater than 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial average, right? So definitely what the previous article said, that we need a lot of finance, we need a lot of technology, right? That is what we need, right? So if we continue down the present road, we will see that the rise in temperature would be 3 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial average, right? And that would be disastrous for the kind of extreme weather events that we will start witnessing. It will be pretty bad, right? And most countries are not really rising up to the challenge, right? Speaking specifically about India, we are pretty vulnerable, right? And we need to commit ourselves, right, that we will do whatever needs to be done, right? Like for instance, the kind of heat waves that we will experience, right, the kind of impact that we will experience from floods, food insecurity, biodiversity loss, challenges to our freshwater resources, it's going to be pretty humongous in the next 30-40 years. It's going to be a really challenging time, right? So it is in our own self-interest that we enhance our ambitions and we start acting on our ambitions on our own, right? We can't wait around. If an examiner asks you that should India wait around for climate finance, should we wait around for technology to be shared with us? So the answer should be that engage in a multi-stakeholder, all-party based strategy, get it created, and start working both on mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation in the sense that try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, try to slow down the impending climate change. Adaptation means that yes, climate will change, yes, extreme weather events are going to increase. So let us secure the vulnerable communities and sections of our society. Let us strengthen the infrastructure. Let us modify the infrastructure so that we can quickly rebuild, so that we can withstand whatever is going to come our way, right? So the idea over here is that whether it is biodiversity protection or whether it is social equity, right, we should integrate learnings from our own failed and successful social experiments and move forward and not be held hostages to the upcoming expected money from the developed countries. It may or may not materialize. So far it has not materialized. So there was a lot of slack in the middle part of this article. I'm very sorry about that. But the key message from this article and the previous article is that climate change is a reality. Something needs to be done. What the world is doing, I have informed you. What we need to do, I have informed you. If you club both of these two things together, if you club the first article and the good parts of the second article together, you will be able to stitch together a decent 250, 300, 350 words worth of content as to what should be done going ahead so far as climate finance is concerned. Now moving to my favorite article, right, which is something that I was waiting for to discuss with you guys, right? Now what is happening is that there is no clear idea as to what is the shape or what is the health of consumer spending in India, right? See, why is this important? Why is this topic important? I'm sure that you all are familiar with this kind of identity that C plus I plus G plus NX is equals to GDP, right? So this is your demand, demand side of GDP. That demand gets created in the form of consumption demand, investment demand. Government also spends money, so this expenditure by government can also be broken up into C and I, but let's leave that for the time being, right? There is a net exports demand. What is net exports demand? That is exports minus imports, right? Imports represents a leakage of demand, exports represents an addition of demand to your economy, right? So whatever demand that gets created in the Indian economy gets created from households in the form of consumption demand, gets created from the firms in the form of investment demand, gets created from the government by itself spending money, and gets created in the form of net exports demand, right? Now 60% plus, around 60% of the demand in the Indian economy or 60% of the expenditure in the Indian economy is coming in the form of consumption expenditure, right? 60%. Okay, so you clearly understand that this expenditure is very important. This expenditure, consumption expenditure, is very important, right? Because it is contributing such a massive amount of contribution, right? And if you want the overall GDP to be healthy, we want this number to be healthy. If you want new factories to be created, if you want new investment to happen, you want this number to be healthy. Because you as an entrepreneur will not set up a factory if the consumption demand is weak. You will not produce much if your consumption demand samne is weak. So if you want great investment, for that consumption demand needs to be strong, right? Now consumption demand can come from a variety of different spaces. consumption demand can come from urban sector, it can come from rural sector. So is urban consumption demand doing well? Is rural consumption demand doing well? These are the kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves. These are the kind of questions that we need to be able to answer, right? That consumption demand, how healthy is it? Which segment is healthy? Which segment is unhealthy? And how do you make the unhealthy segment healthy? These are the kind of questions that we need to answer, right? Now, the point over here is that some say that there are signs of revival, right? Some say that there are still questions regarding how the consumer demand or consumption spending is behaving, right? If you ask companies, so certain companies will say that yes, during the festival season they were able to witness a strong demand, right? Some will say that no, that was not the case, right? If you ask the finance ministry, I'm just laying the problem statement right now. If you ask the finance ministry, so finance ministry said in September 2024 that urban demand is weakening, but rural demand is strengthening. So urban demand, it depends upon the number of jobs, the quality of jobs, the strength of the services sector. Rural demand, it depends upon monsoon, it depends upon agriculture, it depends upon the kind of pricing that farmers are able to fetch for their agricultural and allied activities ka produce. It depends upon Manrega kind of programs, price transfer kind of programs, right? So finance ministry itself is saying in September 2024 that urban demand is weakening and that rural demand is strengthening, right? If you look at RBI, so RBI says that consumer spending is looking at a revival in smaller towns and lower tier cities, right? So you see that there is some kind of correlation between what the finance ministry is saying and what the Reserve Bank of India is saying, right? That especially in rural areas and let's say in smaller towns and lower tier cities, there is some revival that is happening, which is a very good thing because majority of India's population is staying in these areas, in rural areas, in smaller towns and in lower tier cities, right? Again, the question is that consumer spending is still something which is not giving us a clear signal whether it is reviving, whether it is strong, whether it is healthy or it is unhealthy, right? Now the point over here is that why is this a problem? Why are we even discussing this problem? We are discussing this problem because I as a consumer will have a strong sentiment when my earning is strong. If my earning is not strong, my sentiment will not be strong, my spending will not be strong, my demand will not be strong, as simple as that. I think yesterday or day before yesterday we discussed an article that in rural India, real wages have been either stagnant or they have even declined in the previous 5 years. We have discussed this article I think yesterday or day before yesterday. Same story is being discussed in this particular paragraph over here, that consumer spending is weak because of the fact that your real earnings have not been growing in the last couple of years. So despite the fact that the Indian economy has been growing at 7% plus in the last 3 years, wages have not been increasing, right? So our growth has generated huge profits for our corporates who have used that profits to clean up their balance sheets, who have used that profit to arrange money for further investment going ahead down the line. But wages have not increased. So household spending power has barely kept up with increasing prices, barely kept up, right? And whatever savings that households had created in a forced manner because of the lockdown, because everybody was forced to stay in their homes, etc., etc. So that savings is now gone, right? It has been spent away. So there isn't any reserve or surplus moolah lying around which can be spent. So this is what you need to understand about the Indian economy. And who has written this article is Niranjan Rajadaksha. You can really trust that guy to have done his research before writing whatever he has written, right? And this is not politics over here. This is just plain facts, right? So the idea over here is that this inertia that is there in consumer spending, meaning that consumer spending is not, really inspiring us, right? So that's dragging the business investments down, right? Like I mentioned to you that even if you are a very bad business person or a very bad entrepreneur, still you will know that you will not put up new machinery, new factory, right? When you don't know what the state of demand is going to be. If you know that yes, the demand is going to be fantastic, you will put up a new machinery, expand production, because you don't want to lose market share to others. You want to try and grab, right? But when you don't know the state of demand, you will not invest, right? But that's not just one way of looking at it. That's just one way of looking at it, right? There are times when companies look at future 10 years down the line, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the line, and they invest into new industries that are changing the way we live. Like for example, the Jamnagar refinery that was put up by Dhirubhai Ambani. So he didn't put up the Jamnagar refinery कि अच्छा इंडिया के अंदर अभी इतना पेट्रोल डीजल रिक्वायर्ड है, चलो मैं जामनगर की रिफाइनरी लगाता हूँ. He looked 25 years, 30 years, 40 years into the future and put up the Jamnagar refinery, which is a giant of its time, and it is still a giant today, right? So moving away from the Jamnagar example and coming to academics again, right? Niranjan Radhajaksha had written an article earlier, and I'll try to find that article for you, that there is a distinction between Keynesian business investment and Schumpeterian business investment, right? So if you look at the Keynesian business investment, right? So that is dependent on capacity constraints, borrowing costs, consumer demand, right? That acha meri abhi capacity has been completely utilized, right? The borrowing cost is reasonable, consumer demand is strong, chalo let me invest. Or vice versa, that capacity is no longer a constraint, is not a constraint, borrowing costs are also high, consumer demand is also weak, let me not invest. Now this kind of argument, this kind of rationale, that is your Keynesian business investment approach. What is the Schumpeterian business investment approach? Schumpeterian business investment approach is saying that boss, these industries are dead and these industries are the future. So it may take time for the future to materialize, but that is the future. Like for example, your Zomato, I would say that is a Schumpeterian business investment, right? I would say that Byju's, which spectacularly failed, that was supposed to be a Schumpeterian business investment, in the sense that creative destruction is happening. We are changing the way business is done. We are changing the way consumers behave. Ola, Uber, that is Schumpeterian business investment, right? In the sense that your online shopping, that is Schumpeterian business investment, is how I am understanding it, because what is happening is that it is expected that there will be creative destruction of older industries and new sectors will emerge, right? So when you are doing a Schumpeterian investment, you don't look for immediate returns. You don't look for justification by capacity constraints, borrowing cost, consumer demands. You don't look at all of those things. So I hope that you have learned once and for all the distinction between Keynesian business investment and Schumpeterian business investment. And if you're able to speak like this in your interviews, boss, you will impress. And I'm not just asking you to impress, I'm asking you to be knowledgeable and be able to speak in a knowledgeable manner, right? So this is an excellent article by Niranjan Rajaksha, right? So now the question that needs to be answered is that chalo theek hai, we know one thing for sure. We know one thing for sure, that जो केनीजियन वाला इन्वेस्टमेंट है वो तो इंडियन इकोनॉमी में हल्का हल्का हो रहा है. व्हाट अबाउट द शुम्पेटेरियन बिजनेस इन्वेस्टमेंट? आर इंडियन बिजनेस हाउसेस, कॉर्पोरेट्स lining the money up for Schumpeterian business investment, yes or no, right? So if you go by a report by Standards and Poor, right? So Indian conglomerates, they have arranged 800 billion, or they plan to line up $800 billion of investment, right? And a majority of this investment, 250, not majority, right? $254 billion out of this, right, is going into new sectors, right, which are emerging because of creative destruction. So green energy sector is emerging because of the creative destruction of the fossil fuel sector. Semiconductors is emerging for, you know why it is emerging. Electric vehicles is emerging on the ashes of your traditional ICE vehicles ka demolition. Data centers are emerging, you know why they are emerging, right? So this is the world of Schumpeter rather than Keynes, right? That you are taking bets on industries that you have little previous experience in, right? So if Adani ji is going into green energy, it is not as if that he has a lot of experience of going into green energy. If Tatas are going into semiconductors, it's not because they have a lot of experience of going into semiconductor. If Mahindras are going into electric vehicles, if Jio is setting up data centers like crazy, right? So you understand what's happening over here, right? Now, what does our past tell us regarding these new kind of investments that we have done in the past as well? Right. So for example, when we became independent, huge amount of investment was done in our PSUs, right? Whether it is steel, whether it is machine tools, whether it is heavy industry, and private sector played a secondary role, right? We had done huge amount of investments in 1980s as well, our private sector, right? So petrochemicals के अंदर बहुत पैसा लगाया गया था. Private sector in 1999 had invested heavily in the telecom sector as well. So these were new sectors back then, right? And what was the idea? तो ये जो अभी what we are investing, what we are seeing, investment into green energy, investment into semiconductor. So this is another wave of private investment into new areas, right? Now what does the history tell us? History tells us that a lot of the earlier investments into new areas that ended up in grief, right? So like for example, a lot of sectors or a lot of financial business houses, they face a lot of financial stress because of non-performance in new areas. There was a lot of corporate war that happened in the telecom sector and so on, right? There was huge investment for that was done in consumer electronics space by Indian companies in 1980s, and that entire investment is now absolutely giving you zero returns. It doesn't exist. Where is Onida, right? It doesn't exist, right? So the idea, where is Videocon, right? The idea over here that you need to ask is, right, that I'm not saying that what happened in 1980s or 1990s will happen again. The question around Schumpeterian business investment is that, okay, this investment, let it happen. Now, will this investment generate stability, confidence, and maturity such that second round of investment happens around this first investment? For example, right, let's say that we set up electric vehicles ka capacity, our major players. Now, will that mean that other players will step in and start creating an automobile battery ka ecosystem? Like just the way we created, ecosystem for traditional vehicles, will we step up and create an automobile battery ka ecosystem, which will require a lot of smaller private players to participate in that entire exercise? Remains to be seen. Most probably yes, but remains to be seen. I would like to end this discussion by giving a fantastic quote to you, right? So Mark Andreessen wrote in April 2020, you can Google it up, who Mark Andreessen is, right? That when the world was shutting down because of the pandemic, when there was a lot of pessimism, that is when he said that aggressive investments are required in new products, in new industries, in new factories, in new science, in big leaps forward, right? And the focus on new industries by Indian conglomerates, right? Of course, which it has been supported by Government of India through a variety of subsidies, whether it is the PLI scheme or whether it is a subsidy for the entire semiconductor ecosystem or whether it is a subsidy for the electric vehicles ecosystem, right? Or the kind of, regulatory support that they have provided to, the storing of Indian data in India, right? So the kind of policy support that has been provided by the government, right? Can it succeed? That is the question that needs to be answered. How to make it successful? How do we ensure that our Schumpeterian business investments become successful, right? And how do we ensure that our Keynesian business investments are also strong? I hope that you are appreciating that for the Indian economy to grow strongly into the future for 2047 target, right? We need both kinds of investment, right? We need the Keynesian business investment because this is something that we know, something that we understand, something that we can easily regulate, something that we can easily manage. This is something which can make us the immediate factory of the world, right? And then there is this Schumpeterian business investment, which will make sure that we are not losing out when it comes to frontier technology. It will ensure that we are not losing out when it comes to the fourth or the fifth industrial revolution, whichever is underway, right? So I hope that you have appreciated this article. This is a very beautiful article that I wanted to discuss with you, right? We'll meet tomorrow again and we'll take it ahead from there. I hope that you have learned something new, right? Thank you so much. All the best and see you tomorrow, guys. Bye bye.